All right, good morning, everyone. Let's begin. I'm a fan of beginning and ending on time, so we want to be respectful of your time. Thanks for coming. We're really excited. In fact, it's kind of funny. I just got a tally, and only about half of the RSVPs are here. So give yourselves a quick round of applause for being the early birds who actually got out of bed on time. We got a lot more people coming. We're excited. We got a very packed program. For those of you who have joined us in the past, you'll note that we did the format a little bit differently this year. We wanted to pack in a little bit more content and allow you guys to kind of customize your experience. So we got a lot of fun breakouts and some behind-the-scenes information from the legislators and the lobbyists and activists who've been working on some of the hottest issues in Utah. My name is Connor Boyack. I am president of Libertas Institute. I'm going to begin this morning by giving a little bit of a report of what we've been doing over the past year, give you some insight into some of the key accomplishments that we've had. We'll then have a little bit of a break so you can continue eating, get some more juice, mingle with those at your table, and then towards the end of the hour, I'll introduce our morning keynote speaker. If you didn't get one on the way in, this, you can't really miss it. Our bright orange annual report kind of dives into some of the detail that I'll be sharing, so be sure and pick one up. And then we've got our previous year's report as well. So if you're new to our organization or weren't really following what we were doing a year or two ago, be sure and grab both of them. It's very exciting for me to only have about 15 or 20 minutes to do this report and have about an hour's worth of stuff to share with you. So I've had to obviously select what I want to talk about. It's been a very exciting year for Libertas Institute, for the cause of liberty in Utah. We've done a lot, we've accomplished a lot, and so unfortunately I won't be able to dive into it all, but I think that speaks well to a lot of the success and the fun that we've been having. I want to begin by recognizing a few people. So Chris, who's wandering right there, wave Chris to everybody. Chris is one of the new additions to our organization. He's our Director of Development. DJ, I don't believe he's here yet. I think he's getting here a little bit later, is our Vice President. And then Michelle here in the front, why don't you stand up and wave to everyone with the camera. Michelle's our Director of Communications. And so we've been able to have some fundraising success because of our policy success. It's attracted a lot more people willing to support our cause. With that, we can hire more people and do even more. So we welcome them to the team since the past year. A lot of that success comes because we have been able to develop a lot of relationships and influence in the legislature. It's kind of interesting as you see what happens with different groups. Some have been around a while and they are waning in influence. Others are kind of in a niche, so they only focus on one or two issues. As many of you know, we're a very broadly focused organization, and so we're able to develop friendships with legislators across a wide range of issues. Some of whom will disagree with us on one or two things that we do, and then they'll love 8 or 9 things that we do. And so being a little bit more libertarian, that allows us to not fall into the left-right trap where you have those natural enemies. Everyone loves a lot of what we do, even where we have disagreements. And so we've been able to cultivate very respectful relationships, have a lot of dialogue, and build a lot of trust so that when we do need a legislator's vote, we're able often to get it. And so that's really helped a lot of our work. Along with that comes a lot of media attention. In fact, I went and opened the annual report to remind myself of the statistic. Between 2015 and 2014, the amount of media coverage that we got increased by 345%. And so it was a huge year for us, a lot of media coverage, a lot of earned media where we're not having to advertise, but we're able to get our voice and put the perspective of liberty into a lot of the news coverage that's happening. And so that was a huge success. And that was for the whole year. Now we're, five full months into 2016, and with 9 more media impressions, we'll achieve everything that we did last year. And so it's going to be another banner year for us to be able to get our word out. And I didn't even mention the totals. So total media hits last year was 252. And so we've accomplished almost that much in not even half of a year this year. It's kind of funny because Josh and I, our policy analysts, were smirking about this yesterday. We've become well-known and established enough that any good reporter, right, is obviously going to look for the pro and the con or the opposing voices. And so often the media coverage is, look at this great new government program, and look at all this new taxation and everything else, and bigger government. And any good reporter is going to go out there and try and find the contrarian voice that says, well, who's advocating for less taxes or less government or less intrusion? And so they come to Libertas, and we're able to provide that alternative perspective and educate Utahns. One of the things that you'll notice in the annual report for this past year, and many of you probably saw us announce it and plaster Facebook and put billboards up, was the Freest Cities Project. For those of you who didn't see it, this was a pretty ambitious project on our part, and it's the only report of its kind in the country. There are many reports that compare countries or compare states. So for example, you often hear that Utah is the best for business or the best managed state. And so they'll have these comparisons that rank states based on whatever metrics that they choose. Of course, there are metrics in which Utah doesn't perform so well, but the governor doesn't like to mention those, and so people don't really know about them. But we decided to bring that type of comparison down to a city level. And so we took the top 50 most populous cities in Utah, ended up being every city that has about 10,000 residents or more, and we compared them on over 100 different data points, ranging from issues dealing with individual liberty, private property rights, and free markets. So what's your cost of government and the tax burden? How many dogs or chickens are you allowed to own? If you want to set up a home-based business, how much does that license cost? All sorts of stuff like that where you probably would never have looked that stuff up, or if you did, you probably would have only invested the time to look at your city. But now you can go look up your city and see how you compare to cities of like size, cities of approximate geography that are near you. You can now go to your city councilman and say, are you kidding me? You know, I can't have chickens in Ogden, but in every other surrounding city they can have as many as they want. That doesn't make any sense. Let's fix it. And so providing that data allows you and empowers you to go affect some change. In fact, we've heard in at least a couple instances already, in fact, I think it was Cedar City, they recognized that because of our report, we revealed in that report that they had very restrictive gun control laws that were in fact in violation of state law. And apparently no one had really realized it. You know, it's not like they were necessarily enforcing it very aggressively, but bringing that to light caused some discussion in the city council, and they were able to fix that law and correct it and be in compliance with state law. So that report is bringing a lot of transparency to a local level where if any of you have ever worked at a city level, you get as much big government and taxes and even corruption that you get at higher levels of government. So it's much needed transparency, and that's the Freest Cities Project. Another thing that happened unique for us, Utah, because of a law that we got passed a couple years ago, now has the nation's only law enforcement transparency report. So you've heard a lot about Ferguson and some of these other law enforcement encounters, a lot of SWAT team deployments, but a lot of the reports that talk about it say, well, here, we're going to look at this individual case, but we actually don't know how this factors into the much larger picture. We don't have any data. We don't know how many shootings there have been, how many warrants have been served, because this data isn't tracked. And so we wanted to increase that transparency. And so we got legislation passed that says, you know, every time there's going to be a SWAT team deployment or someone's door gets banged down or any of these types of encounters with law enforcement where someone's property and life is gravely at risk, many times justified, of course, we want to be able to know about it. We want lawmakers to know about it. We want the public to know about it. And so the first report of its kind came out last fall, revealing, as many of you might suspect, that the overwhelming majority of these types of high-risk law enforcement encounters are for low-level drug offenses. And so we've been able to use that data to continue to fuel a discussion to try and chip away at the failed war on drugs, try and restore balance to law enforcement, and make sure that we're only using those types of force, especially in people's homes, when it's absolutely necessary. So again, more transparency, like the Freest Cities Project. These types of things can definitely be conversation starters to help increase even more liberty in Utah. We've got a lot more books. Probably if you went to our booth, you saw some of those. The fourth Tuttle Twins book came out dealing with economic protectionism. And then we're really excited about this. It's kind of funny to advertise this guy because no one has heard about him, probably with the exception of our morning keynote speaker who heard about him way before I did. But this gentleman is named Auberon Herbert, and for those of you who have followed Libertas a while, you know we have these little booklets. Back there we sell the law and civil disobedience. So this is our third little booklet. I only came across this gentleman about 4 or 5 months ago, and it wasn't until about 2 months ago that I was able to read some of his material, and I was blown away. I was at a homeschool conference. We were doing a booth for the Tuttle Twins, and I had a little bit of downtime, so I started reading. And for those of you who have read the law, you know how concise and witty and punchy it is. But part of the problem with the law, as you might recall, is he's talking a lot about stuff that happened in France. You know, oh, Monsieur so-and-so says this, and, you know, this event happened, and we don't have that cultural context. So it's a little bit harder to get through the law. This book is just 100% pure principle. You probably maybe saw our emails where we've been starting to advertise this. This is better than the law, and I almost feel sacrilegious saying that because of how amazing the law is. But it's phenomenal. We did an early print run so we could have some available today. They may have told you at the booth. If you can, limit yourself to just getting one for now, unless at the end of the event there's more, and then you're welcome to buy them at the end. Our large print order is coming in about a week, and then you'll be able to buy these, and you're going to want to buy these and spread them around quite a bit. In fact, we're starting a fundraiser later this year. We're going to raise, it's going to cost about 40 grand, but we're going to send a copy of the law and of this booklet to every state legislator in the entire country. It's about 7,500 state legislators, and we're going to try and build up Liberty at the state level even more. So grab a book if you haven't. You will enjoy this guy. Thank you. As you may know from saying that type of project, we've given up on the federal government. You should too. It's a disaster. So help us build Liberty at the state level where we actually can do some work. Let's see, what else? Actually, I'm going to go on a tangent there. I'm going to riff a little bit there. So when I started, before I started Libertas, I was on Senator Mike Lee's campaign, and my goal at that time was to fix Congress and support the Constitution. This is back in 09 and 10. And for those of you who follow politics, I mean, I think this will resonate with you if you don't already believe it. It takes so much money and so much political capital and so much energy to get even one person elected, let alone anything accomplished. In fact, Mike and I, Senator Lee and I, continue to have conversation over the years, and every time I see him, I kind of gently poke him in the ribs and I say, "Hey Mike, good job giving speeches." Because that's basically all that's been able to do. Mike has some phenomenal ideas, particularly criminal justice reform, if you followed some of the work that he's done there. He's got some great things that he wants to do. His problem, Congress's problem, is that the ability to get anything done is little to nothing. And in many ways that's a good thing, because a lot of the proposals at the federal level are awful, and we want that gridlock to stop the tyranny. But here at the state level, it is a completely different ballgame. Certainly if you read our annual report, or I'll go in a minute into some of the accomplishments that we've had, we can get a lot done here. You don't need the same amount of time. You don't need the same amount of money. You don't find the same levels of corruption and financial intrigue with lobbyists and everything else. It's there, but it's surmountable. We can overcome it, and we can get a lot done. And so as I see my friends who've gone to Congress or work in DC, who are getting gray hair and have just hit their heads against the wall repeatedly, I give them an annual report and I say, check out what we've been able to accomplish just in the last year, and they roll their eyes in frustration because they had these grandiose visions of going and changing things, and then nothing has happened. But at the state level, we can get a lot done together. So we're very excited to be focused here where we have some success. The next thing that I'll mention is another lawsuit. You may remember that we filed a lawsuit against Common Core, and perhaps that led into, hey, Common Core stinks. All right, even the governor is now coming around to that position. Yay! We welcome his newfound opposition, ill-timed though it may be. Nevertheless, we are plaintiffs in a new lawsuit together with the Utah Taxpayers Association, dealing with free association and freedom of speech. This deals with a law that was passed. If you know Representative Brad Daw, there was a campaign consultant who funneled a bunch of dark money to go after him and do a bunch of negative mailers, and so he lost his election a few years ago. He's since been elected back into the legislature. But the legislature reacted very negatively to that. They didn't like that these shell organizations were being used to funnel money and to get one of their colleagues kicked out because of all of these lies and half-truths that were used in these mailers. So the legislature passed a bill that was very reactionary. They said, oh, we don't like that, so we're going to crack down and do some transparency. And so anyone who spends over a certain threshold, where's Josh? Josh, you want to nod at me? Is it $750 a year? Is that right? $750 a year. So let's say if Libertas Institute spends more than $750 a year trying to influence anyone or send these types of mailers out, these political communications, that triggers a new reporting requirement that requires us or any organization to disclose all of our donors, the amounts that they've given, their addresses, and what this thing, you may think that that's a good thing, we should know who's spending their money, but there's a bright line of contrast between organizations that are educational in nature, such as ours, and then candidates who are being directly elected to have power where you do want that transparency. What happens in voluntary organizations like ours, in states that have had compulsory reporting of that kind of stuff, is it becomes a chilling effect. Think of Proposition 8 in California, right? Many people who wanted to support Proposition 8 for traditional marriage had a chilling effect that once their data was being disclosed, they did not want to report. And so we want free association. We want people to be able to support the causes that interest them and not have that retribution. And so we are plaintiffs in a lawsuit on First Amendment and 14th Amendment, I believe, if not one other amendment. And that hearing is actually coming up in a month, and our case is very strong. So that lawsuit is against, I believe, the House Speaker, who was then the sponsor of it, the Attorney General, the district attorneys. And so we're engaged in that lawsuit trying to protect free speech as well. Now, I want to share a little bit about what happened this session. Unfortunately, it was a bad session in many ways. Usually I'm very optimistic, and we did a lot, and we were able to accomplish a little bit, as I'll mention, but this year, unlike past years, was a much bigger lift for us. In past years, we've had a lot more low-hanging fruit, policies that were a little bit easier to work on. This year, we kind of went for the jugular, I guess you can say, and obviously weren't successful entirely. But it is a long-term game. We're going to come back with these same legislative proposals. The conversation has shifted substantially. Think, for example, just with medical marijuana alone, the very fact that 6 or 7, I think now, public polls over the past year and a half all show more than 2/3 or more support, and how hard it was 2 years ago to get through the legislature a very narrow bill that allowed just for a little bit of oil, non-psychotropic cannabis oil, just for a handful of people with epilepsy. And that alone was a very huge hill for them to climb. And now to be talking about a full-blown medical marijuana program helping tens of thousands of people throughout Utah, wide range of conditions, the full plant, THC, and everything else, to give people this alternative choice, yeah, it didn't pass. But look at the polling, look at the conversation. We've been talking to legislators in the past few weeks, and even if they have some concerns with the bill that we were behind, Senator Madsen's bill, and they might have preferred a more narrow approach, they recognize that Overton window, the shift, the dialogue is now way over here. No longer is it about, oh, let's go this incremental step. Now it's, okay, we're going to take a pretty big leap. It's just a matter of how firmly that foot is planted, what the regulation looks like. And so those conversations are continuing. As many of you know, the ballot initiative will probably be launched within about the next month. The idea being, for those who are involved, Libertas isn't directly involved, is if the legislature is unwilling to give the people what they want, then the people will do it themselves, and that will likely pass. So, civil asset forfeiture, we've got a breakout session on that in the third hour you won't want to miss, so I won't go into too much detail right now. That bill failed, and interestingly, it didn't fail because of the policy. Had it gotten out of its last committee, we're very confident we would have had a vote in the Senate, and then we would have effectively stopped civil asset forfeiture completely in the entire state. So it passed, or it failed to pass because of a little bit of weird personality and procedural stuff that we'll get into in the third hour. But that bill will come back this next year. It will likely pass. And we're going to be doing a serious campaign over the summer, among other things, video, perhaps some town hall meetings and other events. We're going to be sending a mailer to over 10,000 Utahns on this issue as well. It's interesting as you look at the polling, there was polling done during the legislative session on civil asset forfeiture. And Josh back there, I don't know if you remember what the percentage was. It was like 92 or 87 or some obscenely high amount of people oppose the government taking property from innocent people. Fancy that. But the polling is very much in our favor. And even though that didn't pass this session, that definitely we think will pass this next session, and that will be a good win for property rights. With the help of a few people I've seen in the audience, there were a couple bills that we were able to stop. In fact, I think during the first breakout, we've got Joe Darger here with a couple of his wives, and we were able to work together to stop the recriminalization of polygamy. You may remember that lawsuit with Cody Brown, and they were successful, and the judge ruled that it was unconstitutional to criminalize what's called religious cohabitation. And so the Attorney General's office came back with legislation to try and undermine that lawsuit and recriminalize in statute the voluntary association of people just trying to live together and have a nice family. So they'll talk about that in the first breakout. There are a lot of unique intrigue behind the scenes that Joe might get into. But we were able to kill that bill. Interesting enough, and make sure, Joe, that you mentioned this, it was like literally like 45 minutes before the end of midnight on the last day that we were able to finally put the stake in the heart of that bill. It was a very controversial bill up to the very end, and we had to go toe-to-toe against the Attorney General's office, which is always fun. Another bill that we killed was the vaccination bill. You probably heard a lot about this in the news. And another quick tangent that I'll go on is it's very, I don't know if frustrating is the right word, disconcerting, perplexing, if nothing else, that as we work on a lot of these issues, we're obviously much more behind the scenes than most of you. And we're in these meetings, or we're intimately involved with these bills, obviously, if we've drafted them or we've been helping with them. And it's interesting to see how the media reports on them, right? So we'll sit in a committee meeting, and X, Y, and Z will discuss, and in the report, in the news report, only half of X comes out. It's a great disservice to the public that reads this or watches on TV and thinks that they're informed, that they understand what's happening. And those of us who are in these battles, in the trenches, see what the public thinks is happening, and they only get that superficial level. And not often is it biased. People like to attack the media for being biased, and I think that's very infrequent or an insubstantial amount of the problem. It's mostly that they have limited time, limited space, and where we would want to spend, as we are today, 45 minutes going into, raw milk or whatever, they get, 45 seconds. And so I appreciate all of you coming, getting that behind the scenes, in-depth look into some of what's going on, because the media does not provide it. And that was the case on the vaccination bill. It was interesting to see some of the reports and the way that they talk about it. But if you really read the bill or be in those discussions, it was an almost entirely different beast than was presented to the public. But we were able to kill that bill and make sure that parental rights were not infringed, and so that was another big win. Police body cameras. This goes to show, much like medical marijuana or civil asset forfeiture, takes more than a single session. Police body cameras, Josh, in fact, our policy analyst, did the bulk of this work, that about almost 2 years ago, we started drafting a bill together with the ACLU of Utah and the Utah Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, if I get that all right. And so we're part of a little civil liberties coalition here in the state of Utah, and spent hundreds of hours reviewing every state's policies, proposed policies, all sorts of input from lots of organizations to craft a really good bill. And so that bill was proposed last year, and didn't really go anywhere. There was a lot of opposition from law enforcement, that we were encroaching on their turf or whatever. And so that started at least a dialogue. Over the past year, we had a lot of meetings with the cities and the city prosecutors and the police and the sheriffs and everybody else. And this year, we're able to reach enough of a compromise that we could all live with, and that bill passed. Whereas previous to that time, police were just acquiring these body cameras. They were governing themselves and could make up whatever rules they want as to when they could record, when they didn't need to record, what would happen, who would have custody of the video, would they have to disclose the video, what happens if you're assaulted or in an altercation and then you go to access that video and it's no longer there. And so it was kind of the wild, wild west of policies with this new technology. And so we were able to finally get a good bill that provides a lot of due process rights, open records access, and things like that to make sure that police aren't policing themselves, but that we have some good standards in place. Two other bills that I'll mention, then we'll take a quick pause and then go to Larry. One other bill that we did was self-reliance training for welfare. This was kind of a unique thing that we came up with that Senator Fillmore ran for us, where if you're on state welfare, we want to decrease dependency on the state. And so one idea that we thought of was saying, look, if you want to go on welfare, we're going to make sure that you have to do a little bit of training on self-reliance. And it's, training with big quotes around it, it's like 2 hours. So it's not like their world is going to be turned upside down and suddenly they're going to become self-reliant. The whole idea is to put them inside the office of an organization that wants to build that relationship with them, wants to expose them to other services and programs and activities that will help pull that person out of poverty, help get them networked with services and people that can help them. And so that's going to be implemented over the next year, and then we'll be tracking how that goes to hopefully decrease some of the welfare that we have in the state. And then the final thing, Senator Jackson will be talking about this during the first hour as well. There are some weird issues that we've been dealing with adults being treated as adults. In the state of Utah, until this past legislative session, when Senator Jackson had this bill that we worked on with him, if you were in the custody of the state by DCFS, let's say as a 16-year-old, and then you turned 17, and then you turned 18, you might think that, okay, you can now get out of the state system, you're an adult. Well, if you're in state custody, if you were in state custody and then turned 18, they got to keep you up until you were 21 years of age. And that was a huge problem, right? Because a lot of these cases are horrible, they should never be in custody. And if we're going to treat adults as adults and draw that line at the age of 18, which is what the legislature's decided to do, clearly that those individuals need to be given the option to get out of state custody and get on with their lives. And so that bill passed as well. We'll have other stuff in the annual report, and you'll hear a lot more in the breakout sessions. I'll explain at the end after Larry speaks where to go and how that's all going to be located. So we're going to have about a 15-minute break. Feel free to get seconds if there is any. Mingle a little bit, and then we'll come back in 15 minutes and I'll introduce Larry, and we'll get going from there. Thank you very much. As we were planning this event, we were trying to figure out who the speakers should be. And there was one individual that was high on our list who I've had the pleasure of knowing for several years now. I attended Freedom Fest in Las Vegas last July. They do it in July every year. It's a big libertarian conference. You might want to look into it if you've never been. It's a lot of fun. But I was there this past year, and it was kind of weird because they had like Donald Trump, and it was kind of a weird mix of non-libertarian speakers that certainly don't support freedom, but it was still interesting. But I saw Larry give a speech there, and I was very impressed by it because so often in the liberty movement we have the propensity to be negative and Debbie Downers and things are horrible and oh my gosh. And Larry is one of the most positive and happy people you'll meet. A huge advocate of liberty, well known in liberty circles for quite a long time. He's traveled the world, and if you ever have the opportunity to go sit at his feet, he's got some amazing stories to tell. And so he gave a speech there at Freedom Fest that I said, that speech needs to be in Utah. We need that message of positivity, we need motivation, and that's the message that Larry brings today. Larry is the president of a very distinguished organization, the Foundation for Economic Education. They've been around for, 6 decades, I think, somewhere around there. And he is now its president. They have kind of retooled in the past few years and now have a very specific focus on educating teenagers and millennials and educating the rising generation on the message of liberty. Prior to becoming FEE's president, Larry served for 20 years as the president of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy in Michigan, a very fine group with a lot of success. He's taught economics full-time from 1977 to 84 at Northwood University in Michigan and chaired his Department of Economics as well. Very insightful individual. You're going to love what he has to say. Please help me in welcoming Larry Reed.
Thank you, Connor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and friends of the Libertas Institute. I am thrilled to be here. At FEE, we are one of Connor's biggest fans and are eager to promote his good work and the work of the Institute to our audiences all over the country. Can you hear me all right in the back? You can, okay. I always like to ask that because you never know. I could be a little too soft-spoken or you could be a little too hard of hearing. Like the man who went to see his doctor, an elderly man, to see if he could get some advice that would help with his wife's hearing problem. And the doctor said, well, here's what you need to do. You need to go back home and do a test. Go back home and stand in back of your wife some distance and say something, see what she does, and if she doesn't hear you, get a little closer. Keep doing that until you get to the point where she hears you, and then come back and tell me your findings, and we'll see what we can do from there. So he goes home thinking he's on his way to fixing this problem, and he gets home, he sees his wife at the stove, and about 20 feet behind her he says, honey, what's for supper? And she doesn't turn around, apparently doesn't hear him at all. So he steps 15 feet behind her and says, honey, what's for supper? No response. Then 10 feet behind her, honey, what's for supper? No answer. Now 5 feet behind her, he says, honey, what's for supper? And she says, for the 4th time, it's lasagna. So, it wasn't her problem after all. Well, I'm pleased to be with you to talk about Alexis de Tocqueville. And I do hope that what you hear will prompt you to visit our website, fee.org, where you can read more about him and so many other heroes of liberty and so much other very good material about liberty that we've produced now for 70 years. Normally, it's my custom to speak off the cuff, and I do so probably 95% of the times I speak. But this is one of those that is a prepared text. And that's because I want to be sure I get it right and get it within the time frame. So I hope you don't mind bearing with me as I read this. Hopefully the content will make up for the delivery. Well, over a 9-month period beginning in 1831, a 26-year-old Frenchman visited nearly every corner of what was then the 24 states of the American Republic. From New England to the upper Midwest, to the Gulf Coast, and the deep South to the mid-Atlantic. Then he wrote a great book, full of amazing insights. It made its appearance 181 years ago in 1835. Perhaps nobody before or since has ever defined the essence of America better than he did. But then no other nation in history offered an essence so profoundly exceptional. Here's something he wrote about that is a bit of a commentary on America today versus America of that period and our educational levels. He wrote this in 1835, "There is hardly a pioneer's hut which does not contain a few odd volumes of Shakespeare. I remember reading the feudal drama of Henry V for the first time in a log cabin in America. Less than half a century after the ratification of the Constitution, America was an infant nation, but Alexis de Tocqueville saw in it the stirrings of greatness. He praised our entrepreneurial drive and initiative, our self-reliance and personal independence, and our vibrant civil society institutions and what he called our voluntary associations. He felt our ideals would eventually lead us to free the slaves, expand the franchise, and lead the world. He believed America had placed two sacred principles, freedom and equality, on a higher pedestal than any previous civilization. They were, he said, our most defining characteristics, the sources of our strength. But he also feared that we would carry one to an extreme that would undermine the other. Milton Friedman was echoing Tocqueville when he said in the 20th century, quote, "A society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both." Here's how de Tocqueville himself addressed this issue. He said, quote, "However energetically society in general may strive to make all the citizens equal and alike, the personal pride of each individual will always make him try to escape from the common level, and he will form some inequality somewhere to his own profit." Tocqueville's appreciation of freedom knew few bounds. Here is perhaps his most eloquent endorsement of it. Quote, even despots accept the excellence of liberty," a term he often used interchangeably with freedom. "The simple truth is that they wish to keep it for themselves and promote the idea that no one else is at all worthy of it. Thus, our opinion of liberty does not reveal our differences, but the relative value which we place on our fellow man. We can state with conviction, therefore," and here's the key part, "that a man's support for absolute government is in direct proportion to the contempt he feels for his country." Think of that. I'll read it again. "We can state with conviction, therefore, that a man's support for absolute government is in direct proportion to the contempt he feels for his country." He masterfully described how the growth of government could smother our freedoms. In his words, "After having thus successively taken each member of the community in its powerful grasp and fashioned him at will, the government then extends its arm over the whole community. It covers the surface of society with a network of small, complicated rules, minute and uniform, through which the most original minds and the most energetic characters cannot penetrate to rise above the crowd. The will of man is not shattered, but softened, bent, and guided. Men are seldom forced by it to act but they are constantly restrained from acting. Such a power does not destroy necessarily, but it prevents existence. It does not tyrannize, but it compresses, enervates, extinguishes, and stupefies a people, till each nation is reduced to nothing better than a flock of timid and industrious animals of which the government is the shepherd. Well, Tocqueville's view of equality is more nuanced. He had no issue with the ideal of equality before the law, or even equality of opportunity. He hated slavery and any unwarranted discrimination. He agreed with the words of our Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, but he had no illusions that individuals were thereafter equal in their energies, their talents, their ambitions, their intellect, or their character. He was afraid that our egalitarian impulses might someday get the better of us. Quoting him again, "I have a passionate love for liberty and for law and respect for rights," he wrote. "Liberty is my foremost passion. But one also finds in the human heart a depraved taste for equality, an equality which impels the weak to want to bring the strong down to their level, and which reduces men to preferring equality in servitude to inequality in freedom." Well, this issue, in my belief, especially in the context of today's presidential campaign, is so critical to our freedoms and our future that I'd like to dwell on it for a few moments. Remember this: free people are not equal, and equal people are not free. Free people are not equal. And by that, I'm talking in terms of economic equality, not equality before the law, but in terms of the outcomes we generate by our participation in the market. We're not equal. And equal people cannot possibly be free. If you put it another way, in terms of economics, think of it as free people will earn different incomes. Where people have the same income, they cannot be free. Economic equality in a free society is a snare and a delusion. It's one that redistributionists, of course, envision every day of the week. But free people are different people. We're not programmable robots. And it should come as no surprise that free people, being different people, will earn different incomes. Our talents and our abilities are not identical. We don't all work as hard or as smart as the next guy. And even if we all were made magically equal tonight in material wealth, we'd be unequal in the morning because some of us would spend it and some of us would save it. To produce even a rough measure of economic equality, governments must issue the following orders and back them up with firing squads and prisons. Don't excel or work harder than the next guy. Don't come up with any new ideas. Don't take any risks, and don't do anything differently from what you did yesterday. In other words, don't be human. Economic inequality, when it derives from the voluntary interaction of creative individuals and not from political power, testifies to the fact that people are being themselves, each putting his uniqueness to work in ways that are fulfilling to himself and of value to others. As Tocqueville himself might say, vive la différence. People obsessed with economic equality, and you can probably name a few, do strange things. They become envious of others. They covet. They divide society into two piles, villains and victims. They spend far more time dragging someone else down than they do pulling themselves up. And they're not fun to be around. If they make it to a legislature, they can do real harm. They not only call the cops, they are the cops. I've heard some redistributionists, democratic socialists, whatever you want to call them, make the preposterous argument these days that Jesus was a socialist. How many of you have heard somebody, or would be a redistributionist, a socialist of one degree or another? We have an essay that we've provided for you here that I've written called "Rendering Unto Caesar was Jesus a socialist? I urge you to look at that. It's also on our website if you just type that rendering unto Caesar into fee.org. But whenever I hear that, I'm reminded of a passage in the book of Luke when a man approaches Jesus with a request to do a little redistributing. This is in Luke 12:13 through 15. A man comes up to Jesus and says, "Master, speak to my brother, that he divideth the inheritance with me." In other words, hey, I don't think I'm getting a fair shake here. He got more than me. Can you do something about that? Maybe redistribute things a little differently. And Jesus did not respond by saying, well, I'll look into that. Maybe he did get more than you should get, and maybe I can take some from him and give some to you. I'll get back to you on it. No. You know what he said? He rebuked the man for his envy. He immediately said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or divider over you?" Or if there's one thing I wish our politicians in Washington would come to say and believe, it would be this. Wouldn't it be great to see Nancy Pelosi stand up at a news conference someday and say, I've been redistributing everybody else's income for years, but now I have to tell you, who made me a judge or divider over you? Or if that ever happens, we'll know we've won. I remember being on a panel in Nassau, Bahamas, with two guys, this was on television, two guys interviewing me, both were progressive socialist types. And we were talking economics, but at one point one of them said, Mr. Reed, you're a Christian, right? And I said, yeah. And then he said, but you're a capitalist. You believe in capitalism? And I said, yeah, absolutely. One follows from the other in my book. And then he said this, but what about the story of the Good Samaritan? Doesn't that show the need for government programs? Yeah, this is the progressive line of thinking. They see two things. They see person in need, one solution must be government. And I couldn't believe that what a softball question he'd given me. So I came back at him and I said, wait a minute, the Good Samaritan story, as I recall it, involves a man who comes upon another who's been robbed and beaten to within an inch of his life, and he doesn't say to the hapless man in the gutter, you need to call your social worker. He doesn't say, this is a job for the emperor. No, what does he do? He pitches in with his own time, his own resources. That's why we call him a Good Samaritan. If he had done any of those other things and walked away from it and said it's the job of government to help you, we would know him today as the good-for-nothing Samaritan. Well, I digress a little bit. There's more on that in that essay. Suffice it to say that the 8th and the 10th Commandments, I think, have a lot to say about redistribution by political force, envy. There are no passages in the New Testament either in which Jesus ever endorses the political, that is by political force, redistribution of income from somebody to somebody else. But I've always thought that the 8th and 10th Commandments ought to pretty well settle it anyway. Thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt not covet. They don't say, thou shalt not steal, unless you are absolutely convinced you could spend it better than the guy to whom it belongs. Or, thou shalt not steal unless you can find a politician who will do it on your behalf. It says, thou shalt not steal, period. If economic inequality is an ailment, punishing effort and success is no cure in any event. Coercive measures that aim to redistribute wealth prompt the smart or the politically well-connected haves to seek refuge in havens here or abroad, while the hapless have-nots bear the full brunt of economic decline. Best current example I can think of is in Venezuela, which for the past 15 years has descended into socialism in every form, confiscation of wealth, excessive taxation, central planning, and is an absolute nightmare at the moment. They even now, can you believe this, they even have a shortage of beer. If that doesn't bring on a revolution, I don't know what will. A more productive expenditure of time would be to work to erase the mass of intrusive government that assures that the have-nots are also the can-nots. Another superb alternative to coercive redistribution would be to work on our character. How about that for a change? Each of us, one at a time, so that we're not only good enough for liberty, but good enough to earn a living instead of voting for one. This economic equality thing is not compassion or compassionate. When it's just an idea, it's bunk. When it's public policy, it's compulsory insanity. To those who can't understand how different or unequal we as individuals are, I say, get over it. Tocqueville warned that this unhealthy obsession with economic equality, combined with an erosion in the respect for liberty and property, would produce what we today would call the welfare state. Let me offer you a description of the welfare state. Somebody once said that it got its name because in it the politicians get well and the rest of us pay the fare. Just picture people in a giant circle with each one having his hand in the next guy's pocket. That's the welfare state. The whole notion of the welfare state rests on this really dumb proposition. Since people are not decent and compassionate enough to assist their deserving fellows in distress, we must expect them to elect politicians who are more decent and compassionate than they are. How ridiculous. Those politicians then take money from us under the threat of imprisonment, launder it through an expensive bureaucracy, and spend what's left not to actually solve the problem, but to manage it into perpetuity for endless dependency, demagoguery, and political gain. And then the advocates of the welfare state compliment themselves for possessing a monopoly on compassion and totally ignore the destructive results of their own handiwork. I say no thanks. So here we are. I have another quote here from Mr. Tocqueville. Where did I put it? That fits at this very juncture. Where did I stick it? I think I have another copy right here. Sorry for the delay here, folks. Oh, here it is. I thought here in this case, Tocqueville is using the term democracy, but he doesn't mean a system in which everybody votes on everything. He would be opposed to that. He's talking about representative government and simply uses the term democracy in its place. But he wrote, democracy extends the sphere of individual freedom. Socialism restricts it. Democracy attaches all possible value to each man. Socialism makes each man a mere agent, a mere number. Democracy and socialism have nothing in common but one word, equality. But notice the difference. While democracy seeks equality in liberty, socialism seeks equality in restraint and servitude. So here we are now, decades into the very welfare state that Tocqueville warned would be the death of American exceptionalism. It threatens to make us like all the other forgettable welfare states that languish in history's dustbins. Should we just assume it's inevitable and go along for the ride? Or should we muster the character that built a nation and that Tocqueville identified as quintessentially American? I hope you know the answer. If you're pessimistic, then you're no longer part of the solution. You become part of the problem. What chance does liberty have if its supposed friends desert it in its hour of need? As yourselves, what good purpose could a defeatist attitude, or ask yourselves, what good purpose could a defeatist attitude possibly promote? Will it make me work harder for the causes I know are right? Is there anything about liberty that an election or events in Congress disproves? If I exude a pessimistic demeanor, will it help attract newcomers to the ideas I believe in? Is this the first time in history that believers in liberty have lost a few battles? If we simply throw in the towel, will that enhance the prospects for future victories? Is our cause so menial as to justify deserting it because of some bad news or some new challenges? Do we turn back just because the hill we have to climb may have gotten a little steeper? This is not the time to abandon what we know to be time-honored principles. I can't speak for you, but someday I want to go to my reward and be able to look back and say, I never gave up. I never became part of the problem I tried to solve. I never gave the other side the luxury of winning anything without a rigorous intellectual contest. I never missed an opportunity to do my best for what I believed in, and it never mattered what the odds or the obstacles were. Remember that we stand on the shoulders of many people who came before us and who persevered through far darker times. The American patriots who shed their blood and suffered through unspeakable hardships as they took on the world's most powerful nation in 1776 are certainly among them. But I am also thinking of the brave men and women behind the Iron Curtain who resisted the greatest tyranny of the modern age and won. I think of those like Hayek and Mises who kept the flame of liberty flickering in the 1930s and 1940s. I think of the heroes like William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson who fought to end slavery and literally changed the conscience and character of a nation in the face of the most daunting of disadvantages. And I think of the Scots who in the year 1320, 456 years before our Declaration of Independence, put their lives on the line to repel English invaders with these thrilling words. It is not for honors or glory or wealth that we fight, but for freedom alone, which no good man gives up, except with his life. As I think about what some of those great men and women faced, the obstacles before us today seem rather puny. This is a moment when our true character, the stuff we're really made of, will show itself. If we retreat, that would tell me we were never really worthy of the battle in the first place. But if we resolve to let these challenging times build character, rally our dispirited friends to new levels of dedication, we will look back on this occasion someday with pride at how we handled it. Have you called a friend yet today to explain to him or her why liberty should be a top priority? Nobody ever promised that liberty would be easy to attain or easy to keep. The world has always been full of greedy thugs and thieves, narcissistic power seekers, snake oil charlatans, unprincipled ne'er-do-wells, and arrogant busybodies. No true friend of liberty should just roll over and play dead for any of them. Take an inventory every day of what you're doing for liberty. The very fact that you're here suggests you are very much involved. Get more involved in the fight. There are plenty of things you can do. Whatever you do, don't give up no matter what. Remember these words of the great U.S. Supreme Court Justice from Utah, George Sutherland, who said, "The saddest epitaph which can be carved in memory of a vanished liberty is that it was lost because its possessors failed to stretch forth a saving hand while yet there was time." Can Tocqueville's American exceptionalism be restored? Can it last? Well, you bet it can. The American dream still lives in the hearts of those who love liberty and refuse to meekly surrender it. So let's wipe the frowns off our faces and get to work. Our future, our children's future, liberty's future depends on us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.